In 79 AD, the air beneath Rome's loudest arena, the Colosseum, was thick with the stench of metal, sweat, and animal cages. Deep within the Hippodrome, the maze of underground tunnels, a 19-year-old Dacian woman named Sabina stood in pitch black, shackled and alone. The roar of 50,000 Romans celebrating a victor, the gladiator who had just killed her brothers, echoed mercilessly above. What followed in those hidden rooms over the next 3 hours became one of the most aggressively covered-up horrors of the Roman Empire. It was a ritual so vile that even the empire's own historians struggled over whether to write about it. The Colosseum was more than a building. It was Rome's monument to total dominance, completed just a year earlier in 80 AD. The sand on the arena floor was not for show. It was there to soak up the blood of dying fighters and beasts. Beneath that sand lay a secret world holding Rome's most precious assets: the condemned, the captured, and the conquered. The gladiator games were never just for fun. They were a complex mix of political messaging, religious ritual, and social terrorism. When General Marcus Antonius crushed the Dacian uprising in 78 AD, he returned with treasure and 847 captives, including 124 noble women. These were not simple villagers. They were chieftains' daughters, warriors, wives, and priestesses. Rome didn't just want to defeat their people. It needed to humiliate them so completely that the thought of rebellion would be erased forever. This is the story of that total humiliation, a story Rome tried to wipe clean from history. The terrifying reward granted to a winning gladiator turned a man into someone who could do almost anything behind closed doors. Before we dive deeper into the chilling events in those subterranean cells, if you've ever wondered what really happened after the massive crowds went home like this video, subscribe to Echoes of History, because once you hear this truth, you will never look at ancient Rome the same way again. The accounts you're about to hear come directly from Cassius Dio's records, backed up by 2018 excavations beneath the Colosseum, and supported by Senate documents found in the Vatican archive. This is not a myth. This was the dark reality of sport across the entire empire in the 1st century AD. Now, the gladiator and the condemned were about to meet. His name was Gaius Valerius Maximus, a massive man for the time, standing nearly 6 feet tall at 32 years old. His body was a living map of violence. Every scar was a fight won, a life taken, a crowd thrilled. Born a slave, he had spent 14 brutal years fighting for survival. He had officially killed 89 men in the arena. His only hope was to earn the rudes, the wooden sword of freedom. His deepest fear was to die unnoticed, dragged out on meat hooks like countless others. But this August afternoon in 79 AD, he had defeated the Dacian champion in front of Emperor Titus. His reward was standard protocol: 500 denarii, a laurel wreath, and the first selection from the Captiva female prisoners. Sabina, with her dark Highland hair and pale Dacian skin, stood with 17 other women in a cell. Her fiancé, a warrior named Disabilis, had been killed by Roman troops 3 months earlier. Now, her village burned and her world gone, she waited in silence. All she wanted was a final moment of dignity, a quick death. Her greatest fear was not death, but becoming a spectacle, an object of entertainment for the very crowd that had cheered the destruction of her people. That morning, a guard told her she had been chosen for the afternoon's event. She had no idea what that truly meant. She was about to discover that Rome's definition of mercy was far more terrifying than its cruelty. This was not about individual lives. This was calculated, ruthless psychological warfare. Rome understood that physical conquest was temporary. True domination meant breaking a people's symbols and proving that even the most protected members of their society, their women, now belonged absolutely to Rome. This wasn't just random brutality. It was targeted dehumanization, a message sent across every conquered land. Resisting Rome is pointless. Losing to Rome is absolute. The events that unfolded that day would become so infamous that the Senate would soon be forced to take action. Tell us in the comments what disturbed you most about this initial setup: the calculated nature of the exploitation or Rome's efficiency at making it routine. And join the Echoes of History channel for more stories. At precisely 3 p.m., as the afternoon shadows stretched across the blood-soaked arena, the master of games descended into the cold, damp stone corridors of the hippodrome. The air in the underground complex smelled of fear and panic. He approached Gaius Valerius Maximus, who stood trembling, the adrenaline of battle still coursing through his body. The official held a bronze tablet listing the available spoils. "The Emperor honors your victory," the official formally declared. "By imperial tradition, you are entitled to the spoils of conquest. Choose." No one present knew that this routine choice, a moment repeated hundreds of times before, was about to trigger a crisis that would reach the Senate floor in a matter of weeks. The tablet outlined the gladiators' rewards: gold coins, fine wine, a night in a proper bed, or the most coveted choice, Victoria Carnalis, the carnal privilege granted to the victor. For Gaius, a man who owned nothing and whose life could be ended at any moment, this was one of the few times he held any true power. Roman society didn't just permit this ritual, it actually celebrated it. The core logic of the empire, perfected over generations, was simple. The conquered exist solely to satisfy the conqueror. The horrific preparation for this choice had already begun. Inside the women's holding area, guards arrived carrying buckets of water. The water was not for the thirsty prisoners to drink, but for washing them. The women were scrubbed clean, their hair combed out, and their ripped, dirty clothes replaced with simple, plain tunics. Sabina watched as attendants moved from one woman to the next, meticulously inspecting them and marking down details on wax tablets. An older woman, Zamaxis, a priestess who had once served the Dacian Sun Temple, whispered the terrible truth that all of them had feared. "They're getting us ready, either for the show or for what comes after." The superficial preparations in the cell finished quickly, but elsewhere in the massive arena, something far worse was being set up. This setup would turn a routine act of exploitation into a scandal that future historians would argue about for centuries. Above them, 50,000 spectators were settling into their seats for the afternoon's secondary entertainment. In between the major gladiator matches, arena officials would stage interludes, mock hunts, scripted battles, and what Roman writers politely called mythological reenactments. These reenactments often forced condemned prisoners to recreate ancient legends that always ended in real, brutal death. But today's showcase had a new, cruel twist. It was a massive theatrical display meant to celebrate Rome's absolute dominance over barbarian shame. The arena called, 20 Dacian women were lifted to the blinding arena surface using the underground elevator system. This sophisticated engineering setup was designed to send animals, fighters, and props erupting dramatically from trapdoors. Sabina stepped out into the scorching sunlight and was immediately hit by an explosion of noise. The sheer roar of the massive crowd felt like a physical, painful blow. She smelled the roasting food from vendors, the expensive, strong perfume from the wealthy seats, and underneath it all, the sharp, metallic smell of dried blood baking in the hot sand. What should have been a straightforward execution was intentionally twisted into something far more calculated for maximum, deep humiliation. The 20 Dacian women were forced to line up in the center of the arena. A herald dramatically announced their supposed crimes: rebellion, aiding Rome's enemies, and the ultimate sin, refusing to worship the Roman gods. Then came the twist that shocked the crowd into a hungry silence. The women would be forced to fight each other in pairs, given only useless wooden swords, and dressed in ripped, shredded clothing specifically designed to mock their noble status. The winners, if they survived, would be claimed by Rome's victorious champions. The losers would simply die. The wooden swords were handed out. Sabina gripped hers tightly, the rough wood scraping painfully against her palm. Standing across from her was Camasicus, the sister of Disabilis, the very woman who had taught Sabina to weave and had sung joyfully at her engagement ceremony. Their eyes locked. The 50,000 people in the crowd screamed, desperate for blood. The master of games raised his hand high, paused for maximum dramatic effect, and then dropped it. But neither woman moved. The deafening roar of the crowd quickly shifted. Excitement turned instantly to confusion, and then to pure, furious rage. "Fight!" the crowd began to yell, their voices full of anger. Then came the insults. "Cowards! Barbarians! Trash!" Food scraps, olive pits, and whatever else the spectators had within reach began to rain down onto the arena floor. Still, both women refused to lift their swords. It was the only resistance they had left. It was a powerful, silent refusal. For a full 90 seconds, the greatest, most powerful empire on earth was publicly and completely defied by two unarmed women who simply stood still. Then, the stage drama dissolved into brutal, real violence. The guards stormed the arena floor. Kamashikis was struck violently from behind with the flat, heavy side of a sword, and she instantly collapsed onto the blood-soaked sand. The crowd, in its cruelty, actually cheered. Sabina screamed in horror and rushed toward her friend, letting her own wooden sword clatter to the ground. Both women were quickly dragged away. They were not taken to immediate execution, but to something the audience found just as thrilling and entertaining. The real horror was now about to begin in the hypogeum below. The relentless bureaucratic engine of Roman exploitation kept moving forward without any hesitation. A scribe calmly entered a chilling note into the official record. 20 female captives, Dacian origin, processed for post-victory allocation. The next line simply read, "Too resistant, transferred to private chambers for champion-exclusive use." What came next was Rome's most refined, polished, and efficient system of dehumanization. Human beings were systematically reduced to nothing more than inventory. Sabina and Kamashikis were instantly separated, each taken to different rooms. These small stone chambers were terrifyingly clean and organized. They contained simple stone benches, with heavy iron rings firmly embedded into the walls, and thick doors that could only be locked securely from the outside. This was not the chaos of improvised cruelty. These rooms were an original, intentional part of the arena's architecture and design, just as carefully planned as the lion cages or the gladiator lifts. This was policy. This was the breaking point. At 4 o'clock, Gaius Valerius Maximus entered Sabina's chamber. The heavy door opened, and their eyes met across the small room. He was still in his full arena gear, the armor streaked with another man's blood. She was cornered against the far wall, exhausted, disarmed, and terrified. Between them stood the crushing absolute weight of Roman law. He held complete legal power over her. She had none. She was legally classified as spoils, a reward he had earned through killing. History offers no record of what went through Gaius's mind. Did he see a person? Did he only see property? Did he finally question the brutal system that had turned him into both a weapon and a prisoner? All we know about this horrifying moment comes not from their thoughts or words, but from a clerk's dull, routine report. And then, the completely unimaginable happened. It was an act of quiet, unexpected rebellion. Gaius slowly removed his helmet and set his sword carefully aside. He sat down heavily on the stone bench, burying his face in his hands. For 5 long, silent minutes, he said absolutely nothing. Sabina remained frozen in the corner, bracing herself for the violence that, impossibly, never came. Finally, he spoke, using broken Dacian, a language he had likely picked up from other captives. "What was his name?" he asked quietly. "Mine?" she replied, confused. "No, the man they made you watch die," he clarified. "Disabilis," she whispered. "No, the one from today," he insisted. She shook her head, unable to speak. He let out a deep sigh. "I killed a Disabilis today. Could be family. Your people use that name often," he said. What followed was not the assault Rome expected, but a conversation. It was a conversation between two people whom the empire had tried to strip of every single shred of their shared humanity. Gaius told Sabina about his own father, who was executed when Gaius was only 9 years old. Sabina explained how the Romans had burned her entire home to the ground. 2 hours passed slowly. Guards checked the room twice, heard the sound of voices, assumed that this meant compliance, and simply walked on. At 6 p.m., Gaius Valerius Maximus made a critical decision that Rome would never forgive him for. He stood up, walked to the heavy chamber door, and called loudly for the guard. "This woman is ill," he announced, his voice firm. "Infected. I refuse the allocation. Send her to the physician." This was the only small loophole the ruthless arena system allowed. If a captive was legally labeled as diseased, the gladiator could officially reject her and return her to the status of a general prisoner. The lie was completely obvious. The guard recognized the deception instantly, but Roman bureaucracy was rigidly procedural. Challenging a champion gladiator's choice would involve mountains of paperwork, witnesses, and a lengthy inquiry. Accepting the rejection took only seconds, and so, Sabina was removed from the chamber and taken to the medical holding section. Sabina was removed from the dark chamber and transferred to the medical holding section. Gaius's single defiant act had spared her from one unspeakable horror, but it delivered her immediately into another. She died 3 days later. Her death came from a simple infection, the most common, unheralded killer inside the harsh confines of Roman captivity. The medical unit was not a place of healing. It was overcrowded, filthy, and run by staff paralyzed by apathy. The mercy that had saved her dignity delivered her straight into a squalid death. Gaius Valerius Maximus never saw her again. He fought 2 more times that month. He won both brutal bouts, and both times he openly refused his customary reward. The powerful empire seemed to freeze. Whispers began to spread rapidly through the gladiator barracks. Maximus had gone soft. Maximus had joined one of those strange Eastern cults that preached compassion. Maximus had been cursed by Dacian witches. The truth, however, was far simpler. He had remembered in the darkness of the chamber what it meant to be truly human. This small, isolated act of decency became Rome's point of no return. On September 15th, 79 AD, Senator Quintus Aurelius Sempronicus stood before the powerful Senate with an official petty complaint. His young nephew, a junior gladiator, had been severely beaten by his trainer for refusing the usual customary reward after a minor victory. The nephew claimed that Maximus's example had inspired his own refusal. The trainer insisted he was simply enforcing proper, traditional Roman values. It was a trivial case, barely worth the senator's discussion. Except for one thing. The case forced Rome's most powerful men to publicly acknowledge a practice that everyone in society knew existed, but one that no one had ever dared to speak about openly. The Senate records that survived, the carefully sanitized versions, mention only a vague debate about the appropriateness of certain customs regarding defeated female captives. That incredibly mild phrase concealed what was actually a 4-hour political brawl. The debate was about whether Rome had finally and irreversibly crossed a moral line that even its own senators could no longer stomach. The conservative bloc, led by Senator Fabius, passionately invoked tradition. Our ancestors conquered both body and spirit, he argued. This has forged our greatness. The reformist faction, influenced by Stoic philosophy and more pragmatic thinkers, countered strongly. "We are creating martyrs," they warned. "We are systematically sowing the seeds of future rebellion. Dead rebels are gone forever, but traumatized survivors carry memories that fuel uprisings for generations." However, the true trigger for the Senate debate was not morality at all. It was cold, hard political survival. 3 different provincial governors had recently sent urgent reports detailing sharp spikes in revolt across their territories. Each report specifically referenced Rome's treatment of captive women as powerful propaganda being used by the resistance movements. These governors warned the Senate that Rome was no longer intimidating its enemies. It was actively radicalizing them. The empire, in its unchecked cruelty, was harming its own self. On October 1st, 79 AD, the Senate, driven by political expediency and fear of wider revolt, passed what historians later officially labeled the Lex Captiva, the law of captive women. Its terms were limited in scope but were considered completely unprecedented. The law stated that female prisoners of war could no longer be distributed as public rewards within the arena complex. Furthermore, any public humiliation of conquered women was formally banned from official spectacles. While private exploitation still occurred and was largely ignored by the law, the theatrical public showcase of it was officially outlawed. Enforcement of the new law was notoriously unreliable. Many arena managers simply ignored it or quickly created loopholes. Yet the powerful principle had been established. Even Rome, the most ruthless power in the world, had been forced to admit to public limits on its cruelty. Ironically, the law itself did nothing to free a single person. It only succeeded in removing the audience. 3 months later, Gaius Valerius Maximus finally earned his hard-won freedom. It was granted not for his act of kindness, but for winning 5 more consecutive bloody bouts. His last recorded act as a free man was his single personal purchase of the freedom of a Dacian woman named Camasiccus. The archives list only her name. Historians, however, strongly suspect she was the same woman who had stood beside Sabina in the arena, the woman who had refused to fight her own people. Imagine Gaius's realization. His single brave act of defiance had saved Sabina for just a handful of days. Nothing more. It changed absolutely nothing for the thousands of women who had come before her, and for the countless thousands who would inevitably come after. The massive machine of Roman exploitation was simply too vast, too profitable, and too deeply embedded into the very culture of Rome. His rebellion was nothing more than a raindrop falling into an ocean of blood. Imagine Sabina's final fading hours, dying from a simple preventable infection in a cramped, filthy cell, right beneath the grandest, most magnificent structure of her time. Did she ever wonder if anyone would even remember her name? Did she imagine that 2,000 years later, archaeologists might find her tag and speak her name aloud again? Not a single senator debated her death. Not one historian of the time bothered to mention her name. In Rome's cold, brutal moral calculus, her suffering was not even noteworthy enough to officially register. The tragedy is not simply that Rome was cruel. Cruelty was a fact of ancient warfare. The true tragedy is that Rome industrialized it. It turned atrocity into entertainment. It standardized suffering with paperwork, supply lines, and dedicated architectural planning. It created a system so total, so complete, that people simply disappeared into it without leaving a trace, save for faint, desperate scratches on stone. In 2018, archaeologists from the University of Rome, led by Dr. Isabella Fortunato, excavated a forgotten section of the Colosseum's eastern hypogeum. What they uncovered was something that will never appear on any tourist brochure. They found a cluster of small chambers with heavy iron restraints built directly into the thick stone walls. They found drainage channels carefully cut into the stone floors. They found deep scratch marks clearly carved by desperate, frantic hands. They recovered pottery fragments and remnants of bedding materials, heavily compressed by years of weight. Carbon dating confirmed these rooms were from the original 80 AD construction. They were built intentionally, not added as an afterthought. 6 small bronze tags were recovered during the 2018 Colosseum excavation. Each tag was stamped clearly with the single word, Captiva, and dates spanning 79 to 82 AD, the exact years of the Dacian suppression. These chilling physical findings match the available textual evidence. Cassius Dio's later writings described specific allocation chambers for conquered women. Seneca's earlier vague letters alluded to the very existence of the practice, though without any detail. Tacitus, a historian normally known for his graphic detail, was conspicuously silent on the matter, implying that even he found it too repulsive and horrific to record plainly. Historians still debate the frequency of the practice. Some argue it was rare, reserved only for major triumphs and spectacular games. Others point to the specialized construction of the chambers, the abundant archaeological evidence, and the multiple textual sources, arguing that the practice was a routine part of the system. The truth, most likely, lies somewhere in between. It may not have been constant, but it was certainly common enough for the Romans to design and build dedicated infrastructure for it. Romans treated their gladiators like ancient rock star celebrities, but with an intensely dark and controlling twist. Elite, wealthy women would bribe the guards just to meet them. Engraved lamps and ancient wall paintings show gladiators posing naked with their weapons, embodying raw power. Their very sweat and their blood were sold openly as aphrodisiacs. Some elite women even drank the gladiators' blood as a desperate fertility cure. This was the same hypocritical society that both worshipped these men and fed them into a massive machine of death, rewarding them with the sexual authority over human beings. Historical accounts describe decadent, nocturnal entertainments after the major games, where wealthy patrons mingled freely with gladiators and slaves. Women captured in war were paraded naked as living trophies, sometimes forced to reenact ancient myths involving gods like Jupiter or Mars before they were simply used as gifts. Prisoners were forced to strip during triumphal parades. Victims were tied to stakes to imitate myths before their executions. Enemy queens were publicly paraded before being handed over to triumphant generals. None of this was accidental or random. It was all a cold, calculated message to the entire world. Rome owns your past, your present, and your future. Gladiator games were not random spectacles. They were part of the munera, ancient, solemn obligations owed to the public. Patrons who hosted the games had immense financial and political incentives to maximize the spectacle. The open humiliation of high-value captives became a primary selling point. The 19th century historian Theodore Mommsen called this process Rome's most efficient machine of dehumanization. What he meant was chillingly simple. Rome didn't just conquer bodies. It systematically conquered identity, memory, and the very meaning of a defeated people's existence. The fact that we are still debating these events today shows exactly how deep the scars of this cruelty run. The modern film Gladiator only whispered about this dark reality, hinting at it in the shadows. Modern scholars still debate whether discussing these practices responsibly exposes Roman brutality, or simply risks sensationalizing ancient suffering. But this story matters, because it shows precisely how a great civilization can defend and perpetuate profound cruelty through its own laws, customs, and entertainment. Rome was not the only empire capable of horrifying acts, but it perfected the ability to normalize them. It turned unimaginable violence into a public ritual and completely transformed human screams into crowd-pleasing spectacle. The deeper truth remains this: the line separating civilization from barbarism has never been measured by marble temples, impressive paved roads, or towering triumphal arches. It is measured by how a powerful society treats those who have no power at all. Rome engineered aqueducts that have survived 2,000 years. Yet, at the very same time, it built horrifying hidden chambers beneath its stadiums, where human beings were violated and destroyed as casually as props in a performance. Its brilliance and its moral emptiness existed side by side, without any contradiction. The story also reveals how power fatally distorts everyone it touches. Gaius was simultaneously a victim and a tool. Enslaved, controlled, and forced to kill for his own survival, he was nonetheless granted a fleeting, terrible authority over someone even more helpless than he was. The system twisted ordinary people into instruments of cruelty and turned human suffering into entertainment, when it should have stirred deep empathy instead of wild applause. It warns us today about the inherent danger of using tradition as a moral justification. Our ancestors did this became Rome's standard answer to every ethical question, until habit finally replaced humanity, and atrocity became routine and acceptable. The story raises urgent questions we still struggle with today. What other buried horrors lie hidden beneath the magnificent monuments we admire? How many famous tourist attractions sit on layers of forgotten human misery? When does confronting the past become a necessary moral act? And when does it cross the line into exploitation? Think again of Sabina's final moments, dying alone of infection in a cramped cell beneath the grandest structure of her time. Did she imagine that 2,000 years later, archaeologists might find her tag and speak her name aloud again? History's darkest, most unsettling stories remind us that progress is never guaranteed. They remind us that civilizations fall morally long before they fall physically. They remind us that every single generation must choose between genuine empathy and cold efficiency. Rome chose spectacle. The cost was measured in lives erased, but the lesson survives in the desolate ruins beneath the arena floor. And so, a gladiator's victory became a dark permission for cruelty. A routine reward became one of Rome's most carefully buried scandals. Hundreds of Dacian captives disappeared into bureaucratic lists, and one young woman named Sabina survived her immediate horror only because a single fighter made one unusual human choice. A choice that changed nothing in the grand scheme except proving that humanity could still flicker, even in the heart of Rome's darkest machinery. If this story unsettled you, please subscribe to Echoes of History because uncomfortable truths matter far more than comforting myths. The deeper secrets of history often hide right beneath civilization's greatest monuments. The blood on the arena sand was not always from battle. Sometimes it came from innocence turned spectacle, from power completely without restraint, from the moments humanity looked away, while cruelty received thunderous applause.